The Ed Bernstein Show. Now, here's Ed.
Well, time is rapidly approaching. The election is really getting close. And you know, we see a lot of commercials about the Senate race and the governor's race, but some of the most important elected offices, we don't really see commercials on. So in this show, we try to really demonstrate who some of the candidates are. With me today, we have two candidates, Bob Beers, who is a familiar face in Las Vegas, and a little bit later in the show, Danielle Pieper Chio, who's running for Justice of the Peace, will be on. Look, you've been in city politics for quite a while. I mean, you have a lot of experience, and I mean, some of the things that I recall, I mean, you're in the state assembly, state senator, you were a city councilman for a few times, and for a few different elections, you maintained your office, and it's a little bit confusing to me, and I was hoping you can explain it to our viewers, because you were a city councilman in Ward 2, and now you're running for Ward 4. But you had moved. You
That's
and your
because
wife
I
had
moved. Yeah, my wife and I moved into Sun City, Summerlin. And that's, although it was only a mile from our old house, because we'd actually located where we were to be by the babysitters, which was my parents and Sarah's parents, who were original residents of Sun City. So we finally moved into Sun City here about 5 years back and love it, and decided to run for city council because it was a seat that had to be vacated due to term limits. So it was an open seat. I've long had this fascination with how we govern ourselves. My mom tells the story that in junior high school, I'd run out and get the newspaper before school and read it before I went to junior high school. Right. So I've always had this keen interest in how we govern ourselves and how the world works. And I think that's why I've continued to be involved in the process. The city of Las Vegas is a big entity now, 640 or 50,000 people. And there are 6 wards. They call the districts wards. Why, I don't know, but that's what they call them. And wards 2, 4, and 6 are west of Rainbow, roughly, and wards 1, 3, and 5 are east of Rainbow. And they are staggered, so every 2 years, 3 of them are up, and then they toss the mayor in once in a while. That'll happen in 2 years down the road.
But and I'm sure you still run out and get the newspaper today,
I do,
right?
yes.
Okay. I did it this morning.
I still have
sure,
the old ink-stained newspaper, yes.
Yeah, me too. But also what is different is that in the past, the city would have their elections in the spring, right? And then the law changed, and now the elections are in November. Is that better or worse?
Different. It's probably better on the citizenry, because they're not really used to, still after many years of having a 6-month offset for city elections that trail, no one really was used to it, and you could see it in the turnout numbers. This last primary election was the first time that we've been synchronized with the rest of the world, and the turnout was about 5 or 6 or 10 times more than we typically see in a city council primary. So we're now mainstreamed, I guess, if you will. And it appears that's going to be the way it goes for a long time. Personally, I think it's a good idea because I'm a fan of efficiency in the way we do this, and it didn't make any economic or fiscal sense to have our elections different.
Right.
So now we're in with everybody else, and city elections don't cost any more.
And I should mention that your background is a CPA, you're an accountant, and on the city council, when you did serve, you were always the one who was most concerned about the budget, who understood it the most.
Yep. Budgets have always been important to me. In the legislature and the assembly, I served on the Ways and Means Committee for all of the sessions that I served there, and then in the state Senate, I was on the Senate Finance Committee, in fact, vice chair for the 2 sessions that I served in the Senate.
You have a budget at home as well?
We do have a budget at home. We break it here and there, but we do have a budget at home, yeah. Yeah, we do.
So, yeah. But you've also run for a couple other things in the past.
Yeah.
I did myself, and was very thankful not to win
Indeed.
win the race that I was involved in.
I ran for treasurer 4 years ago. Sometimes when you run and you lose,
right,
the guy that wins does a good job. And I think that's been the case with the treasurer. When I was defeated 8 years ago for city council, that guy didn't do very well. So it's just kind of...
You know what? I mean, you bring something up, and it's kind of what I like about you, is that the guy who replaced you was a Democrat. The guy who beat you, right? He was a Democrat. You're a Republican. And the other person you're talking about, I don't know, are they a Republican?
The other person was a Democrat too.
A Democrat, okay.
Yeah.
But you don't really show that partisanship.
We're all Nevadans.
Right.
And there's no box on the voter registration form to check Nevadan. You have to pick one or the other. My parents were Republicans.
Right. And then your district, you were telling me before we went on the air, is less than a third Republican, less than a third Democrat,
The
and
biggest
more than a
group
third
on a percentage basis is what we call in the political business other. So it's the combination of nonpartisans and then members of other smaller parties. State law says you all got to pick a party when you sign up to vote. If more than 10% of you pick the same party, you're a major party, you go down that branch in state law. You minor parties go down that branch. And so they're very different. And we can't lose track of the fact that the reality has been, historically, those nonpartisans and others participate in a smaller percentage than Democrats and Republicans. Democrats and Republicans turn out, more than 50% of them vote in general elections. Not necessarily the case with that other group.
And
so you have to kind of weight everything accordingly when you're planning your campaign.
And you see that as where the future is going in politics, more of that.
In my opinion, Democrats
party?
and Republicans continue to screw up Washington,
Right.
And that's driving registration away from Democrats and Republicans.
And in your district, so you seem to me to fit into that category very well. What are some of the things that are important to you and why you're running for city council?
Well, I guess the short answer is, in case Washington gets kind of wobbly, we want to have a strong local government, and I think I can help make that happen. The city's essential responsibilities are to make sure we have clean water in, dirty water goes out, the garbage can't pile up in your yard because you decide not to pay your garbage bill, surfacing of the streets periodically. Most of what the city does is an appropriate 911 response. Toward that end, we have a fire and rescue department. We write a very large check to Metro every year. We have a city jail for lesser offenders, and we have a city court system that adjudicates those lesser offenders and has some other duties as well. But that's basically what city government, the dog catcher is part of the 911 response. That's basically what city government does. I personally had some victories in the 5 years I served, but the one that sticks with me the most is I got a Customer Service Excellence Award from the Chamber of Commerce. They have secret shoppers out in the community and turn in people that they have good experiences with. And in the public sector, that's pretty hard to do, to get a Customer Service Excellence Award. And that's why I make my cell number available. I answer it. I call back myself. It's 702-592-8822. It has been for a long time. So, and I enjoy very much interacting with citizens because government can be an intimidating, mystifying thing. We often grow up thinking of the government as a thing, but it's really 5, 6, 10, a dozen different entities. To some extent, they're competing amongst themselves as well, and it's kind of hard to figure out, I have a problem, which level of government do I want to go talk to about my problem? So I love helping people sort those issues out and pointing them in the right direction.
One of the other major things that city government does is zoning, and you've been really in the thick of that in your career. Badlands is something I read about. When I go out and grab that newspaper and bring it in the house.
Too many days that's been on the top of the headline, I know.
Yeah. And you took a position on that, which I guess the Supreme Court ultimately agreed with you on.
The Supreme Court decision is pending. The lower court has decided I was right, and we'll see what the Supreme Court says. And it's not whether I'm right or wrong, it's what the law says. Cities are in charge of land use. We try to make sure that we don't have dissonant uses next to each other. like we don't want to have a marijuana dispensary or a bar next to a school. Kind of makes sense, right? So in that vein, the Badlands Golf Course was at Alta and Rampart, and it failed. It had been zoned residential long before, even though somebody built a golf course on it. Some of the residents that lived right off the golf course didn't want it to fail, but it failed.
Because they purchased homes
on a golf course.
Backyard was a golf course.
That's correct,
yeah.
And who can blame them? But the law is the law. All of those people who purchased those homes, on their second page of their 15-page contract, had a big paragraph in bold-faced letters that said the golf course is going away. So no one was theoretically surprised, but it's still a very painful thing. Eventually, the city decided to take the golf course. It did, by taking the development rights, which makes it a little bit more complicated. The owner sued and said, you've taken my property without compensation, which is an eminent domain issue. It's called inverse condemnation. Mm-hmm. And that's what the suit was about. There was 4 suits because it was in 4 land parcels. And the first one is pending before the Supreme Court with a $45 million judgment against the city. The city will have to write a check for $45 million.
Because the court ruled that it was a taking.
If all 4 go that way, you're talking at $180 million, about the same size as the check that the city writes Metro every year, and more money than we spend on our fire and rescue department in a year. So it's a huge amount of money. The question that we taxpayers should have looking forward is, well, what's going to happen? Well, how's this going to play out? And typically when there's a lawsuit over commercial interests with a government and the government loses, the lawsuit person trades their money winnings for permission to do what they wanted to do in the first place. And that's probably more or less the way this is going to work out. This has been a gargantuan suit. Lawyers, just tons and tons of lawyers. So there's substantial cash out-of-pocket legal fees in addition to the taking issue. We can give back what we took.
Right.
We can't undo the thousands of hours that hundreds of lawyers or dozens of lawyers have spent working on it. So we'll probably have to pay cash for that part, but hopefully in the end we won't have to pay cash for the taking because we'll be able to negotiate giving them what we took back.
How is our city's financial condition?
Our cities in general are pretty well run financially. It's kind of weird right now because Washington has dumped a lot of money on all of the local governments in Clark County. For whatever reason, typically those grants come with big particular things you must do with it. So it's directed and targeted. But it's a huge amount of money that the cities, not just Las Vegas, are sitting on with instructions to spend, with a big emphasis on giving stuff away to poor people to alleviate the difference between rich and poor. It begs a big question for me, and that is, someday Washington may decide to stop borrowing money for giveaways like this. And then what happens? Because to the extent we've created a job for someone, funded with that money source, and that money source goes away, then how do we continue their job? And that's going to be a painful problem some point down the road if Washington stops acting like this.
Yeah, driving around the city seems to me like one of the important issues that I'd like to see the city deal with better is homelessness.
Yep.
It just doesn't seem to go away. It seems to get worse.
It does. Everything we do seems to get worse, but you can also, one of the things that happened with this big glut of money from Washington is the city went in and closed down a nonprofit medical clinic and then built a medical clinic. So I'm not sure that all of the strategies make sense, or certainly the way they're executed are quite right. I'll have a better handle on that when I get on the city council and can ask. I mean, I can always ask the questions. It's just getting the answers back is a little tough unless you're on the city council.
Yeah.
That is one of the big focuses, and I don't know ultimately what the answer is. You know, back in when you and I, actually before you and I were born, the federal government maintained mental asylums, and people who refused to take care of themselves were placed there. Yeah. That was done away with, I think, in the 70s or the 60s, and now they're not. I worry that they were better off with a roof over their heads and a guaranteed meal than what they're subjected to living in dirt fields and begging for scraps.
Well, at the very least, I think getting them the medications they need to function are important, because at one time
Yes.
we used to do a better job of that, which the state has not done.
And one of the tragedies
yeah.
is that those miracle medicines have a side effect. Makes you not want to take your medicine. It's a problem.
Well, it's a problem, and we do still have problems. So if you want somebody who's going to watch those
Plenty
numbers
to work on up there.
and give you good customer service, keep your eye on Bob Beers. And when's the election? November
8th.
November 8th. We'll be right back with Justice of the Peace candidate Danielle Pieper Chio.
When sorry is not enough. Enough said. Call Ed. EdBernstein.com.
Well, one of the most important positions for most of us is a justice of the peace, because it's typically the judge most people have an opportunity to come in front of, and it's also, in my opinion, when you're in front of a judge, that judge has total control over making a decision that may impact your entire life. With me today is, having set up that important position of Justice of the Peace,
Yes.
Danielle Pieper Chio. And you're not a politician. I
am not.
Right? Obviously, you have to be an attorney to run for this position.
Yes.
And you're an attorney in the district attorney's office.
I am.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for having me on your show. I've been a prosecutor for 19 years, and I made the decision last July that I wanted to run for office.
And what goes into making a decision like that?
Oh, lots of prayer. Just kidding.
No, because you have a very, very important career and job. You tried these major cases for the district attorney's office. You've convicted, some really bad people over the years.
I think so. I kind of thought about it. I have less than a decade left in the county. And I sort of, over the course of my career, realized that I had accomplished most of the things that I wanted to do. And I realized that I wanted to give back, but I wanted to do it in a different way. I love being a public servant. I love my job at the district attorney's office. I'm currently the head of the gang unit. And I just thought, I think this is an opportunity for me to be able to establish myself in a different way, to give back to the community and those that I've worked with over the past almost 2 decades. And so I made the decision, after talking to my family, to run for office and to run for Justice Court.
And when you say the gang unit, what is the gang unit?
So the gang unit at the district attorney's office prosecutes most of the cases that come from the gang unit at the LVMPD. So Metro has their own gang unit. There's also cases that come from North Las Vegas and Henderson. There's about 10,000 gang members and over 500 gangs in Clark County. And so we prosecute almost all of those cases, but there's only 4 of us. And so we can't take every single case. And so over the last 10 years, I've been on that unit. And I'm proud of the things that we've done. Over the last 2 years, we saw that there was an issue prosecuting gangs in the entirety. So what we did is, over the last 2 years, we prosecuted 4 gangs under the racketeering statute. And I'm really proud of that, because I think we lowered violence, and those were the gangs that were most dangerous in Clark County. One of them was the Aryan Warriors. They had committed crimes out on the streets as well as in the prison, and we prosecuted 18 members of the Aryan Warrior gang.
Do you see gangs become more prolific, or are there more gangs today than there used to be? Growing up, you see motorcycle gangs and things like that, and There's several famous movies about some of the gangs, but the gangs today are different.
Gangs today are different, and mostly because society has changed and gangs have changed along with it. So let's say 20 or 30 years ago, we had gangs that were based on territory, maybe color, and race. I think over the past 20 years, we've changed sort of what we do in the city, and so gangs before were only in predominant areas. Now people are sort of moving all over the city and all over the state, and so what happened was gangs got moved all over the city and state. And so suddenly you would find a Blood gang member with a Crip gang member in a high school, and there was nobody else sort of that had the similar ideology. So they started sort of what we called clicking up. They started kind of forming their own gangs. So we have what's called hybrid gangs. They first started in California, and then they came to Clark County, and they are sort of what is predominant here. You can still find maybe a Blood gang member and a Crip gang member, but they are usually part of other larger gangs. And they, still do the same things. They're involved in drug activity, violence, gun sales, and they also do some pandering of females.
Well, I mean, it's become more and more complicated and complex, because it used to be that, hey, if there was I don't know, a Russian immigration, all of a sudden you have these Russian gangs,
yes,
or a Colombian gang,
yes,
but now it's all hodgepodge.
It is, and it was difficult at first for law enforcement to understand what was happening, because we would arrest individuals together that would not typically be together. And so I think through intelligence working, we realized, gangs have changed, things have changed. So law enforcement had to change the way they sort of investigated cases, because it wasn't what we typically had 20 years ago. And so that over the past 10 years has changed. And so I enjoyed doing that. And then prior to that, I was on the sexual assault unit of the district attorney's office, where I prosecute people that did bad things to women and children, mostly.
Well, those are some tough jobs you've had.
But I've enjoyed it. All that my public service, I've enjoyed all of it, which is why I wanted to continue doing what I did, and I see being a justice of the peace as a continuation of that.
What characteristics do you look for in a justice of the peace?
I think experience. I think experience, like most people would say, well, experience on the bench. And I think that's a factor. Obviously, I don't have any experience on the bench, but I have 19 years of litigation experience. I've tried over 50 felony jury trials. I've negotiated hundreds of cases. So I think part of it is understanding and knowing different parts of the system. I think that's important. I think diversity helps. I was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, but I was raised by a single mother that had to struggle. So as you say, judges have a lot of effects on people. In the justice court, some judges have called it the people's court, because we see a larger portion of people than maybe in district court. And I think in justice court, you need to have that compassion and understand how to work with people that may not look like you or have the same circumstances as you. I also think you have to be able to solve problems, right? In justice court, it's civil cases under 15,000, it's TPO cases, so temporary protective orders.
Let's go through this, what justice court is,
okay?
Because it has a civil component.
It does.
So you can sue somebody,
yes,
right, for an amount under $15,000.
Yes.
Okay, so small, it used to be called small claims.
Yes.
Right? And then the other,
temporary protective orders,
okay,
so they handle those, not people that are sort of blood related, because those go to family court. So the TPOs, and they have landlord-tenant. That's their sort of civil area that
right,
they deal
so
with.
Rent disputes,
yes,
non-payment of rent,
yes,
that type of thing, trying to
yes,
get evictions, that type
yes,
of thing. Then you have the whole criminal side, which is a little bit more complex, because everything kind of originates in justice court,
exactly.
Right?
Everything originates in justice court. So they have initial appearance court, which is, so prior to probably 2 or 3 years ago, when you were arrested, you would see a judge within 48 hours. That has been shortened to 8 to 10 hours. So when you're arrested, between 8 and 10 hours, you will see a judge who will make an initial determination on probable cause. Then you will actually be formally arraigned, where you will be given a criminal complaint, what the state is charging you with. Usually within 2 weeks, if you're still in custody of the initial or of the arraignment, a preliminary hearing is set. A preliminary hearing, the state has to show slight or marginal evidence that you committed a crime. That happens at a prelim. Or let's say the case that gets negotiated, or you can make the decision to waive your preliminary hearing and go straight to district court, which I call the trial court. It's the law and order court. Kind of looks like what most people would see on TV.
And you also do make decisions on bail.
That's correct.
As well, right?
That is the biggest issue in justice court, is going to be bail decisions.
Yeah, because it seems like there's some tendencies in some states around the country
Yes.
to change the bail structure. How do you feel about that? Let's explain what it is, first of all.
So New York City is probably the best
Right.
example. They legislated that if you are charged with certain crimes, you essentially are just out of custody. There is no, you get
No bail.
arrested,
No
and
bail.
right. There's
Right.
no bail
You can-
setting.
So if you show up for court, you do. If you don't, you don't, and
Right.
you're out there to commit. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, I
I
mean,
don't know.
I think that in Nevada, our bail structure
Mm-hmm.
and what we've done over the past, 10, 15, 20 years, I think works. The Supreme Court has added recently under Valdez-Jimenez a component, which is the defendant's ability to pay. But it's, there's about 10 or 15 factors that a judge looks at, including community safety. So I think if you're going to have a judge, you need them to be able to make decisions. I think taking it away from judges is it's not great.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. Whether it's on bail issues or sentencing
Right.
issues, particularly in federal court, oftentimes there's guidelines, and that's
Right.
starting to change now a little bit as well. But
I agree.
Where if judge had no discretion, he had to sentence somebody,
Yes.
irrespective of who that person was, to certain parameters based on the law. Now,
Right.
it takes the discretion away. I guess it protects against discrimination. It
It can, but I think, if you're looking for a judge that's experienced and understands the system and has worked in the system, you want that discretion, because it could take away discrimination, right? But it could not. I mean, at the end of the day, it all depends how you look on it. And I think most people want a judge who's experienced, who understands the system, who's worked within the system and problem solved. That's what you want in a judge.
Look, that's why it's important for us to elect good judges.
It
right?
is.
And I assume that's why you're running.
It is why I'm running.
Okay. So the election, November 8th,
Yep.
Justice of the Peace, because it's a countywide election.
It is a
You'll be
county.
on everybody's ballot.
Except for Henderson and North Las Vegas.
Okay, right, but countywide, right?
Yes.
Clark countywide. And so it's Danielle Pieper Chio. So look for her in your ballot.
Thank you.
There are more and more trucks on the road, and there are so many more accidents. If you or your loved ones have been injured in a truck accident, you need to call me.
Enough said. Call Ed. EdBernstein.com.